Hey guys, it's Haley and welcome to another bookish video. So today it's going to be another installment in my ranking every book in an author's backlist series, and you can probably tell by the title, today we are ranking every single book by Grady Hendrix. Grady Hendrix is one of my all-time favorite horror authors. Y'all probably have heard me rave about his books. I read some during Summerween in that vlog, and then obviously you've heard about them in my wrap-ups. So you pretty much know that overall I like all of these, and I think all of these books are worth reading, especially if you like gruesome, gross, disturbing horror with a funny, sarcastic, satirical twist. That is kind of Grady Hendrix's specialty, and I personally really enjoy that. So let's go ahead and get into the books. How this is going to work is I'm going to give you a brief description of what the book is about and my thoughts and my rating, so you know kind of if you want to add it to your TBR, put it on your radar, and then at the end of the video, after I go through every single book, I will rank all of them for you guys and do my definitive ranking of every single book on Grady Hendrix's backlist. The first book that I ever read by Grady Hendrix was the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and unfortunately, I do own all of his books, but I don't have a lot of them with me because my mom and I have very similar reading tastes, and I just dropped off a bunch of books for her to read, so I gave her like the majority of my Grady Hendrix books to read, so we're just gonna have to do a picture for now. But yeah, this was my first book that I read by Grady Hendrix, and it was definitely not my typical horror book. It had a lot of elements that I really did like. It was set in a suburban setting, and you guys know that I like domestic thrillers, so it was an easy way to kind of dip my toes in the water of horror while staying in a setting that was familiar to me. So the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, you can probably guess what it's about just by the title. This book club of stay-at-home moms in the late 80s and early 90s. They kind of break away from the bigger book club in their neighborhood because they're like,
listen, we're not wanting to read the classics, we're not into literary fiction. We want to read true crime and horror and thrillers.
Which I would totally be a part of that book club if I lived in the neighborhood and I was a stay-at-home mom in the 80s. Like, that sounds just like my aesthetic. And obviously there's a lot of like suburban paranoia, satanic panic, all of that during this time. And they start to suspect that one of their new neighbors is in fact a vampire. And our main character starts doing her own investigation. She is very nosy and inquisitive, and I love characters like that. She is one of my favorite characters from any horror book because I just loved following her perspective. Like, she definitely wasn't the brightest bulb in the box, but you could not tell her that. Like, she was out on her own doing her investigation, and then she would just find herself in these sticky situations that I thought were just hilarious. This book also has a lot of really great social commentary too, because one of the kind of subplots in the book, besides finding out if this man is a vampire, is finding out if he is the reason that all of these children that live in the like black neighborhood that is like more run down outside of the like white rich stereotypical suburb, if he is the one behind the disappearances and killings of these black children. And our main character is our ally queen everyone needs. She is out there trying to draw attention to these murders that the police force and really everybody else is kind of ignoring and letting just get swept under the rug. So you guys know that's one of my favorite things in a thriller or horror book, is having that little bit of just social justice or advocacy piece. And I think without that, the book would have still been okay, but that piece I just really liked. Also, Grady Hendrix's just signature style is really, really great. It feels immersive. It feels like you are there and what's happening to the characters is happening to you. It's very descriptive, and there are some scenes in that book, they like still stay with me. They were so gross, especially the descriptions of like rats and cockroaches. Oh, I can literally like, I feel the heebie-jeebies of just like thinking about reading those scenes. And that is just such effective horror writing. So the imagery, the kind of satirical take on the suburban woman in the late 80s, early 90s, combined with the social commentary and all of the horror aspects and story in general led me to a rating of a 4.25 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it. The next book that I picked up by Grady Hendrix was Horror Store, and as you can see, this is kind of like a play on IKEA and what would happen if an IKEA was haunted. So it follows these employees that are staying after hours to do some like inventory and like just pick up an extra like evening shift, and creepy things start happening. I loved the menagerie of characters that we were following. They all had such distinct personalities and they were so funny. It was a little bit like when you're following a group of teens in a classic slasher movie and you just know like, oh, the bimbo's gonna die first, and then the like main character girl next door is gonna survive to the end and be the final girl. Like, it was like that kind of a horror trope, but in this setting that was just so refreshingly weird. And I loved the commentary on how ridiculous IKEA is and just talking about the meatballs and how the furniture falls apart in like 2 days. I absolutely love this book. I thought it was hilarious. I was cracking up through the whole thing. And of course the horror elements were there as well. That signature Grady Hendrix descriptive style was there. It did have some scenes that like totally grossed me out. And this one was super, super fast paced. I think I read it in like a day or so. It's so easy to flip through. And the whole format of the book, I wish I had it here to show you guys, is like an IKEA catalog. I just thought it was an amazing, amazing book. However, the end was just a little teensy tiny bit lackluster for me until I flipped to the epilogue. And then I was like, okay, that's redeemable. But because of that one moment of like, I knocked it down from a 5-star to a 4.5 out of 5. After Horror Store, I picked up my best friend's Exorcism, and this one absolutely blew me away. It follows two best friends in the 80s who do everything together. They're kind of like their own little support system. They're not the most popular girls in school, so they rely on each other to get themselves through. And one of the friends starts acting really weird. So the other one, our main character, is like, okay, something's going on. Nobody's noticing. When I try to tell my parents or her parents or the teachers, they don't do anything. Nobody believes me about this. So I'm gonna take it into my own hands and perform an exorcism on her. And that concept is just so creative, so amazing. And the whole book was just so entertaining, but it wasn't just like, oh, I'm watching what's happening. Like, I felt very attached emotionally to these characters. They had such depth, and I really felt the emotions that they were feeling, especially when like the teachers and the parents aren't listening to our main character. I was getting so angry, like, oh my god, how can you not see what she's seeing? So I really felt the emotional attachment to the characters. I was starting to tear up at the end of the book because it was just such an emotional journey. I really feel like I grew up with these girls and I knew who they were, and it was so heartbreaking to see their friendship fall apart as one of them really grasps to not lose the other friend. Also, the 80s references to like music and movies and just like the way that they would talk, I found so fun. It was also a great summer read. The summer atmosphere was like chef's kiss amazing. It had that perfect balance of being funny and fun and lighthearted and really scary and just crazy with the imagery and the horror aspects. But then between those, it also had the emotions to keep you invested in the story. And I loved it. This was pretty much a perfect horror book for me, and I gave it 5 stars. Following that one, I picked up We Sold Our Souls, and this is like a satirical horror talking about the music industry. It's following this jilted guitar player. She was a part of this band, and the lead singer kind of took off. He made it big and left the rest of the bandmates in the past. So our main character, our queen here, is just feeling a little dejected. She's just working at a Best Western, like,
damn, my whole life could have worked out like that lead singer that I kind of like helped launch into fame, but here I am at the Best Western.
And we follow her as she kind of gets paranoid that this famous guy, this lead singer of her band, is trying to take her and the other bandmates out so they don't like expose him or try to get, I don't know, fame from him, from his fame. I don't know. This plot was really convoluted. There was a lot of paranoia, a lot of conspiracy, and a lot of like speculative elements that I didn't quite jive with. It was just a little confused and all over the place for me, but I kind of liked that in a sense because it made me feel disoriented, and I think that was the point. That was like part of the horror. However, it did hit a point where it was just a little too confusing, so I just checked out and wasn't paying attention to exactly what I was reading, I gotta be honest. I didn't feel that same emotional connection to these characters that I felt in like My Best Friend's Exorcism or the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So I just felt a little bit removed from this. It was a little bit weird. There were a ton of music references in like metal music that I didn't quite know or understand. So maybe that's my fault for picking up a book centered around the music industry. I thought it was gonna be more like rock music or like emo music or like alt music, which I'm totally into, but it had a lot of like references to metal, and that's not really that's not something that I enjoy. I'm not in the metal community, so that was a little hard to connect with as well. Overall, I don't think this was a bad book. I think if you like the description or it sounds interesting to you, definitely go ahead and pick it up, especially if you like Grady Hendrix' writing style. I think there's a chance that you could really connect with this and like this, and it could just be a personal thing for me. But yeah, I don't know. I just didn't connect as much with this one, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Objectively, I know it's a good book. It wasn't my thing. Following We Sold Our Souls, I picked up Paperbacks from Hell, and I actually listened to this one on audio, and I thought it was really great. It was narrated by Grady Hendrix himself, so it was cool to kind of hear the voice that I've been reading the words from for, I don't know, 4 or 5 books at this point. And this book is actually a non-fiction, and it's just a catalog detailing the quirky history of paperback horror books and how the horror genre got traction in the 70s and 80s with these little paperbacks and movie adaptations. And if you're a fan of the horror genre, I think you'd really enjoy this. I did. I thought it was really fun and different. I almost never read nonfiction, and I'm super into horror movies, horror books, horror everything. I like the tropes, I like the genres, hearing about classic horror. So I thought this was really fun. It was cool to see kind of like the evolution of the genre and how like really classic things have impacted where we are today. Also, Grady Hendrix is just so funny. The way that he talks, I like him as a human being. He's very funny, and he put like little jokes in there and satirical stuff and would talk about like random quirky horror books that I had never heard of with like killer frogs and stuff like that. So it was really fun, and it was a really short, quick, easy read. I don't rate any nonfiction that I read because I don't know, I feel like it's just weird to rate facts or someone's experience that they've lived. So I didn't give this one a rating, but I definitely enjoyed it and recommend it, especially if you're a diehard fan of horror like I am. And the final book that I picked up from Grady Hendrix is his newest release, The Final Girl Support Group. And I just recently read this one in a vlog. So if you want to hear my like full in-depth thoughts about it as I'm reading, I will go ahead and link the vlog up above and down below. This was one of my most anticipated books of 2021. It was a 5-star prediction for me just because I love Grady Hendrix writing so much. And I knew this one was gonna have a lot to do with the horror genre. You can just tell Grady Hendrix is such a avid horror fan like myself. So I thought that I would really connect with it in that way. And it has the trope of Final Girls, which I love. Final Girls by Riley Sager is one of my favorite books. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I really loved it. And it also has the like support group, like therapy element. If you don't know, I'm a therapist. So it just had all the ingredients to be one of my favorite books. It follows this group of final girls from the 70s, 80s, 90s, where these huge tragedies happened and they were the only girl to walk away from the massacre. They formed this secret support group where they could help each other and get away from the media attention of it all and just be there for each other. And they're the only ones who really understand what the others have gone through. So it was kind of just a place for them to talk about their experiences. Also, all of them had like horror movie adaptations based off their massacre, which you can probably imagine, although it would bring in money and notoriety, would be really traumatic to see your own very real trauma sensationalized on screen. So I thought that discussion was really interesting as well. But along the way, as we're meeting all of these final girls, we also find out that they are being taken out. And our main character, everyone thinks that she's paranoid and she thinks that this is like all a conspiracy, that all the final girls are being taken out. But as it starts to get more serious and more of them start to be killed or go missing or not check in with the group, they're like,
oh shit, maybe she's right.
So it's kind of like a manhunt to figure out who is doing this. Is it one of the final girls themselves? Is it an obsessed fan? Is it their therapist? Like, it is so interesting to have all these different theories while you're reading, because I probably went through about 5 or 6 different theories of who was the culprit as I was reading this book. So overall, I thought the story was really interesting and entertaining. I especially liked, again, the horror tropes and references. However, this book is just not what I was expecting. It didn't have the like 80s, 90s nostalgic vibes that I got from Southern Book Club's Guide or my best friend's Exorcism. And I don't know. It's just not what I was expecting. The characters were a little bit older because it was taking place in like present day, and all of their like tragedies happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So they were like middle-aged to almost like old women, which I don't know. I don't usually follow the perspective of older people. I like following the perspective of people closer to my age or even younger than me. So that was a little bit different and not what I was expecting, but I ended up getting used to it a little bit into the book. Overall, I thought it was enjoyable. I don't think there's anything really wrong with this book other than it was a lot of twists back to back that were like boom, boom, boom. Like, oh, you think it's this? No, it's actually this. Wait, no, it's actually this. Oh, it's kind of this like person on the side. Well, kind of, but then there's also this person like helping out. Like, it was like very much like you think you know what's going on and then you don't, which can be exciting. And I do like that in a thriller, but when it feels like confused, I don't like it as much. It feels like Grady Hendrix did not know really who he wanted to carry out the crime, so it felt a little bit confused to me. And because I did enjoy the rest of the book and that part was just a little tad bit annoying and like didn't meet my expectations, I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. So now that you know all about Grady Hendrix books and my thoughts and ratings for all of them, let's go ahead and do what you came for. Let's rank them. My least favorite book by Grady Hendrix, which again, I still recommend all of these, this is just my least favorite, is We Sold Our Souls. Above that, I would rank Paperbacks from Hell. And then the Final Girls Support Group, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and then Horror Store, and obviously my top most favorite book by Grady Hendrix is my best friend's Exorcism. This is just one of my favorite horror books of all time. Like, you really can't beat it in my eyes. But despite the rankings for all of these, I recommend you check them all out, especially if you like horror. You can just tell Grady Hendrix is a horror fan. So it's really fun to read his books. Also, they were just really funny and enjoyable. It feels more like light-hearted, fun horror than like really heavy, people are dying kind of horror. Even though people die in his books, it just doesn't feel as heavy. So I really like Grady Hendrix, and I hope you guys find a book to pick up from this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one.